In the last video, I didn't talk much about Buddhist practice, but actually it was woven through the entire video. And you also notice that I spent a fair amount of time talking about Sullenberger and the miracle on the Hudson. Now that discussion was not meant to be motivational. Rather, it was about a path. Specifically about a path that reflects a disciplined response to complexity. And this is where Buddhist practice helps a lot. In fact, complexity and Buddhism, secular Buddhism, weave together extremely well. And by the way, just to repeat, I've said it before, this is secular Buddhist practice, so there's zero religion associated with this. So why do this? Why combine Buddhist practice with complexity? The answer is simply this, that when management systems fall apart and you end up with loose connections in your system's elements, complexity is going to be present and new behaviors are going to emerge. And what's needed is a way to stay focused without becoming hidebound and locking on to one thing, without, as is said in Buddhism, without becoming attached. And I'll talk about attachment a little more. When management fails, in other words, when your rule book is falling apart, then what happens is you need governance and you need leadership. And those two components are all about emergence. You want to be able to have eyes open, wax out of the ears, feet on the ground, and free of bias so that you can see what emerges and decide what elements of that emergent behavior you can harness in order to come up with a plan for solving your customer's problem profitably, taking care of your people, taking care of yourself, and maintain connection across your entire stakeholder population. Said another way, when we focus on management, that's about, in Buddhist terms, attachment. And in Buddhism, attachment is the source of suffering. Okay, so we got to be careful here. Having management systems is fine. In fact, when you've stabilized your methodologies, you want to have systems. I think about just checking out at the grocery store. When you scan something for the UPC code, you would like the stated price to be the one that comes up. So that you really do need rules, and you need a management structure to hold that performance together, to hold all those transactions together. But what happens when you're in an emergent situation where your rules aren't taking you where you want them to, and things are starting to fall apart, well, the phrase I like to use, now you're starting to tap dance on ball bearings, and your job is to be the even-tempered one so that clients, employees, vendors, etc., they see you as the stable person in the presence of how things are morphing, maybe even with a bit of upheaval. So let me say it another way. In complex situations, solutions emerge. They aren't forced from an existing system. In fact, if you try to force something when you're in a complex situation, it's going to be a disaster. There's no two ways about it. So what's needed then is a frame of mind that will help you be humble enough to pay attention to what emerges and then grab what you think can work and put together methodologies that are appropriate for the current situation, realizing, since you're on a dancing terrain, things may shift in the future so that now you and your people have to get used to reorganizing. There's a Buddhist term for dealing with all this, and I like it quite a bit. It's called active attention. And in active attention, you have a focus on who's your customer, what's their problem, and theoretically what a solution looks like. And you have that in mind. You may not have all the details. You just might have a statement of work, and you don't necessarily have a design specification to go with it. In active attention, you develop the skill to think about where it is you need to go while you're working with the variables involved and the people you're working with are moving on you. And you don't have that UPC code scanning type system present. You're constantly having to adapt. Oh my gosh, this is where secular Buddhism helps a lot. That's how I got into secular Buddhism, because I was looking for the simplest path to solve my customer's problem and do it profitably, among other things. But for now, we'll just stay with that. In the next video, we're going to take this further, and we're going to talk about 3 key components to working on a dancing terrain. And that's leadership, governance, and management. And by the way, I sound like I'm knocking management. No, what I've been talking about is avoid introducing management until you have the stability that's required to solve the customer's problem. And then you can introduce rules that actually have transactions associated with them, so you're not having to have tons of meetings, etc. The mistake that can be made is trying to force management on the situation before all the patterns have emerged, all the variables have emerged, all the stakeholders have emerged. If you do that, if you try to force management when it's still an emergent situation, you're going to drive yourself and everyone around you nuts. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.